Let's go over basic navigation in AutoCAD. The first thing that you'll note in AutoCAD is that you don't see any lines that tell you how big something is. And that's because AutoCAD is essentially a unitless void until you give it units. And if you were to say, turn on your grid, even if you have a grid, you know, it looks like a 5x5 grid that's useful, but you'll notice that as you scroll in and scroll out, that 5x5 grid changes. So really that's just there to give you the idea of where the plane is. And it's not super helpful relative to actually making dimension. So we tend to ignore that. When you're navigating in AutoCAD to start with, it's useful to have something to look at and to reference. So let's do that by just giving ourselves a rectangle. And I'm going to come up to the ribbon up here at the top. That's what this is. So go to the ribbon and then go to the draw panel, which is the first one. I'm going to click on this rectangle that says rectangle, essentially. And I'm going to drop in a rectangle, and I'm going to make that rectangle a certain size. And because I'm a theater person and I think in 4x8 sheets, let's make it 4 feet by 8 feet. So 96 inches by 48, and I have a 4x8 rectangle. So you'll notice that it drew it in there and it extends past the screen. So to zoom out so that I can see the full thing, I'm just going to scroll on my scroll wheel. Lovely. And then to center it, I'm going to click on the center wheel, and you can see that that hand icon pops up, and that lets me grab the paper, or the air quotes paper, and just move it around. So that's the two basic things that you're going to spend a lot of your time doing, is just positioning things so that you can see it. When we get into three-dimensional drafting or three-dimensional modeling, you're also going to add in the shift key. So shift will let you rotate around an axis. So when I hold shift and then I click and hold the center wheel and then drag, that shows me, or that allows me to manipulate the third axis and kind of rotate around a point. And the point is that green sphere in the middle right there. Truthfully, we're not going to get to that for a while, so I'm just going to go ahead and go back to the 0, 0 or the flat view by going to my view cube and just clicking on the top. And that brings me back to that flat view of the XY plane. Speaking of which, technically there are coordinates relative to X and Y. So if I was to try to take a measurement from here to there, there would be, the numbers would be non-zero. However, most of the time, what we actually want to do is to pay attention to relative coordinates and relative distances. So not being exactly on XY, not a big deal. Oftentimes we'll align that to the 0, 0 of our theater space for other reasons, but we'll get into those reasons much, much later. So we've drawn a rectangle. Let's talk about how we select things. And to do that, we're going to need a couple of more things. So I'm going to draw a circle. Why the heck not? And let's make them overlap. I'm also going to draw a polyline, which is going to give me kind of an irregular shape. Shing, 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 shing. Woohoo! I'm going to hit spacebar to end that command. And let's do, I don't know, a polygon, because why not? And we'll do a 6-sided polygon. I'm going to drop the center somewhere. Okay, so I have a bunch of shapes and they're all overlapping. So let's talk about the left crossing window and the right crossing window. The left crossing window is when you click, like I don't have any commands started, and I'm going to click to start the command. And then I'm going to drag, and you'll notice that it gives me a blue box. And as I pull that blue box across these shapes, the ones that are fully encapsulated by the blue box will be selected. And you can tell because they're highlighted. So see, as I go across to that rectangle, I've fully encapsulated the rectangle, but the circle has a section that's out, and the trapezoid, that's not a trapezoid, and that hexagon has sections that are out, which means that they will not be selected when I click again. So I'm going to click again, and now I have selected the two things that were encapsulated by the crossing window. You can also click and hold, so let me do that, so that you can then kind of navigate around certain things. So let's say that I wanted to get the the polygon shape and my hexagon, and I don't want anything else. But so I could do it this way, but I could also click and drag, kind of customize where that goes so that I drag those two. If I'm honest, I rarely use that. I would rather do something else, honestly, just because it takes a little bit more time to do that fine movement. The right crossing window is the same general idea, but instead I'm going to start at kind of the imaginary right corner of a square. And here you'll notice that those shapes get highlighted the second that I touch them. So with the right crossing window, anything that the window touches will be part of the selection. So I'm going to select all of these items, polygon there, and you'll notice is the second that I cross into that shape and cross out, it's highlighted like I'm going to, because that will be included in my selection. It works the same from bottom right to top left cross and top right to bottom left cross and vice versa. So this is the same as this, and this is the same as this. Lovely. We love it. You can also add and subtract things. Like if I want to select the circle and the hexagon, I can do that just by clicking on them. If I want to get rid of one, I can push the shift button, and you'll notice that a little minus sign pops up next to my cursor. That tells me that I'm removing it from my selection. So let's say I want to add. Right now I'm not touching anything on the keyboard, I'm just hovering over this. You can see that you've got the plus sign, which means it's adding it to my selection group. Plus sign, adding, and then I push shift if I want to subtract it from my selection group. So however you choose to do it is of course up to you. The thing that becomes fastest for you is, I don't know, different from person to person. But let's say that I want to do all of them, but that I could do that, or I could just do that. Whatever the case, it's up to you. You'll notice sometimes that you're getting these grips. So these grips are there so that you can manipulate the location of those grips. This is not typically something that we do for theatrical applications or for technical director applications, because we generally want to be more accurate. But you should know that it's there, and honestly know that it's a thing that's just going to drive you crazy over the next few years. So I can move things as a side, or I can move them at a point. Again, not something that we will often have to do. Basically only if our designer has given us some weird shapes that we have to deal with. How they behave is consistent across shapes. One thing to note is that if you push, you can change what the shapes are doing. So there's a bunch of options here, and if you hold shift, it locks you into a 90 degree, which is to a point. Oh goodness, to a point. Once you're out here, it locks you into 90 degrees. Which can be helpful for some two-dimensional drafting stuff. Again, it's one of those places where a lot of times we just don't need that functionality, but it's a good thing to know about. What we do use quite often is the move command. So we've kind of toured through some of this stuff real quick, not a whole lot. Now let's tour through some of this stuff. So we have move, rotate, copy, mirror, fillet, array, scale. We'll get into a bunch of this other functionality later. For now, let's talk about move, rotate, and copy, and maybe mirror. So these are ways that we have to manipulate the shapes that we have, that we've drawn already. So that's why it's in the Modify tab. If I want to move this, I might be tempted to just grab and move it, and you can absolutely do that. But a lot of times we don't actually want to move based on the center point, which is what that's going to give us. And you can see here that I don't even have a center point to move from with this shape. So you actually have to tell AutoCAD that that's what you plan to do, and you do that by either clicking on the move button in your ribbon or by typing M on your keyboard or the entire word move. It will work either way. Then you can select your object, hit spacebar to accept, and then you establish a base point. So the location that you want to grab from, and then you move it to the thing. So let's say that I want to move this, the center point of this edge to this point right here. I'm going to click and then click. So you probably noticed that some fun shapes popped up. Let's Control Z out of that to take a look at it again. So I'm going to click, select it, then type move, spacebar to accept, establish my zero or the place that I'm going to grab from, the base point, select it and move it. So the triangle and the rectangle that just popped up when I did that are called OSNAPs, which is short for object snaps. Object snaps are there to let you move things relative to a particular location on an object in your drawing. And they're really, really, really helpful. Let's take a look at them a little bit more in depth. If I go down here and to this little tray in the bottom, I can toggle OSNAPs on and off, and you can see that here, that they've toggled on, off, then back on. And then if I right click on it, or click the down arrow here, I have a whole bunch of different options. So endpoint, that means the end of a line segment. Midpoint is the center point of a line segment. Center is the center of a circle. Geometric center, oh, that's why that didn't have a move point maybe. No, I don't think that's it actually. Geometric center, so on and so forth. All of these are going to give you different OSNAP options. Some people like all the OSNAPs on all the time. Some people like only some of them. You really need to go in and play with them and draft with them and then see what your preference is. For me personally, I like endpoint, midpoint, center, geometric center, quadrant, intersection, extension, and then occasionally tangent, and occasionally a couple of these other ones. But most of the time, if I want to use those specifically, I will do that in an ever so slightly different way. So for now, let's turn on the same ones that I have here. So again, endpoint, midpoint, center, geometric center, intersection, and extension. Let's go ahead and get quadrant as well, so that we all have the same tools that we're working with. So let's say that I want to align this circle to the center point here. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to type move. I'm going to grab one of the quadrant points. So you'll notice when I turned on that quadrant point, it gave me a point at 0 degrees, 90, 180, 270 to grab that circle from. And then I can line that up to any of those other OSNAPs. And you'll notice that they have different shapes. The shapes are there to tell you which OSNAPs you're actually using. So I've placed that exactly where I wanted to. And you know what? I can even like change the size here so they line up together. Look at that. Oh, but it didn't move quite right. All right. That was a bad idea. It's fine. Okay. Getting used to your OSNAPs and learning how to play nicely with them is going to be really, really helpful for your future. Let's take a look at some of these other commands as well. So this hexagon isn't quite square, and that's going to bug me a little bit later, right? So let's say that I want to make this actually square to the x-axis, or parallel to the x-axis. This edge wants to be parallel to this line here, this imaginary line. So to do that, I'm going to use my rotate command. And something you will notice about rotate is that it's by default relative to the zero degree line, which is only sometimes kind of helpful. A lot of times, especially if I have something that's already angled funny, it's going to be unhelpful. So to change that, I'm going to click here, and instead of clicking to the instead of basing it off of this weird angle that I'm already at, I'm going to type R for reference, and you can see what options you have down here as well. I can do copy or I can do reference. So I'm going to click. I can either click here or type reference. I'm going to type R, spacebar to accept it, and now it's asking me for a reference angle. Well, an angle is determined by 2 points. So this is the point that I'm going to rotate from, and this is the point that I want my axis to be 0, or where I want it to be 0, basically. So I click there, and now I can rotate it based on that point. That's much, much easier to control, and I can use some of the polar tracking which we haven't talked about yet, to lock into place, or I can type in a number. That brings up polar tracking. So let's introduce ourselves to this button down here. Polar tracking restricts your cursor to specified angles. Sort of. So when you're close to something, it just means it's going to snap to, let's say that I've got polar tracking turned on for 45, 90, etc. That just means that if I'm close to 45, it's going to snap to that 45-degree angle. For the vast majority of stuff that we do, we're either going to use 45, 90 or 30, 60, 90. It doesn't really matter which one. In general, it's based on whatever you're doing in this particular show. So let's try that without polar tracking. I'm going to Control Z my way out of this. Turn off my polar tracking again. So if I do that without polar tracking, I start my reference there and then there. When I try to go to 0, I got nothing, which means that I can't actually snap to it, which means that I just have to kind of eyeball, and that just sounds like a terrible idea. So and if I type 0, well, 0, oh, it is based on the global coordinates. So anyway, polar tracking, it's a thing. And reference, it's a thing. Usually, I like my polar tracking on. And you can tell that you've snapped to something with polar tracking because it'll tell you that that's what it's doing. That's why it says polar. And that green line extends into infinity to show you that as well. That doesn't mean that I can't put in something else. Let's say I wanted it 50 degrees. I can just type in 50 and it's now rotated to 50 degrees. This here is 50 degrees. Lovely. Okay. So let's say that I also have something like this, but I want to duplicate it and mirror it. So well, let's just talk about just mirroring. So I can start that command by clicking mirror, or I can type MIR, short for mirror, hit spacebar, and duplicate it. So let's go back and think and talk through that a little bit more closely. So I've started my mirror command. I've established the point that I want to mirror around, and then I've dragged down to give it the axis at which it's going to mirror. So you'll notice that I'm mirroring across the vertical here. If I rotate this, then I'm going to mirror across what is apparently a 45-degree angle. And here I would be mirroring across the x-axis. When you click, that's going to establish the placement, but you then have the option to erase the source object or to keep it. In this case, let's just say I actually wanted it mirrored in the first place, and that's it. Cool? Okay, great. So let's make something that we might actually make. And to do that, I'm going to need a rectangle. Let's draw a 4x8 Hollywood flat. So I'm going to type 48 inches to give me the horizontal and 96 to give me the vertical. I could also put that in, actually let me show you that. If I type rectangle to start my rectangle command, hit spacebar to accept, place the first corner. I'm going to say 4 feet. So you indicate feet with an apostrophe, so 4 feet, and 8 feet on the other axis. I used tab to navigate between the two. Tab, tab, tab. And then spacebar or enter to accept. So let's say that we're going to use 1x4s, which are actually 3.5 inches thick. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that first 1x4. And that also wants to be 48, but this one is 3.5 inches. Oh, I just used a decimal. I don't have to use a decimal. I can also use a fraction. Let me show you that in a second. Well, let me show you this first. So with this, I have a few options. I can copy this either by clicking here or by saying CO for copy. And then I'm going to establish my base point. And then I can just copy that up. Look at that. Now I have a top rail and a bottom rail for my flat. let's go ahead and get the dimension for this. I could just draw a rectangle and then make it fit, but me being me, I would rather just type in the number once. So I'm going to use my distance command, DI, to get that dimension, 7'5", or I could do the math in my head, whichever one is easier for you. So I'm going to start another rectangle. This one is 3.5 inches, separating the inch from the ½ inch with a dash, 3.5 by 7'5". You'll notice that I didn't have to put in inches, it just kind of assumes that. I could duplicate this by rotating it or mirroring it. Let's do it with the rotate command. So I start my rotate command. I grab the center point. It can be the center point of any of these because I'm just mirroring around that vertical line. And I'm going to type, before I start to move this thing, C for copy, which is then going to, oh no, oh, I'm a dingus. Okay, trying this again, I was thinking of mirror. So rotate, establish my base point. Let's do here. I'm going to say, nope, rotate command. My base point is going to be the center point of this thing. Type C for copy. And I'm going to rotate it around. Boom, there we go. Look at that. Okay. Let's copy this, place it in the middle like that. And then we're just going to use some of that functionality that I said we seldom use, and that is the stretch functionality. So I'm going to click this. I'm going to hold shift to force it to snap to its 90 degrees, and then go to there. So that's given me a rectangle. And then I'm going to copy it again. And this time, I know that I want one 24 inches above and 24 inches below, because I'm going to do every 2 inches on center. This is a 4x8. So I can just type in 24 spacebar, 24 spacebar. So I basically used all of the stuff that I had already, some fairly simple commands to give myself a drawing that is actually going to be useful later, which is kind of lovely. Getting fast at this is going to take time and practice. So don't be frustrated if you can't go as fast as I did, because I wouldn't expect you to. Okay. Thanks for watching. Practice this. Let me know if you have questions. Have a good one.